What's up, guys? Welcome back to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at SoundHound AI stock, ticker symbol SOUN, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Monday, April 8th. Okay, guys, SoundHound stock here today down 9 cents a share. That's minus 1.71%. SoundHound is, for the second day in a row now, our wildcard stock winner. The 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time upload slot is for our wildcard stock, which is voted on by you guys in the comments section across all postings on the channel each day. And SoundHound won for the second day in a row. Let's take a look. Let's pull out all the bias that the market gave us today, starting with an analysis of the volume profile here on the 5-minute chart. Now, the moves that I'm primarily interested in here, this fade, pop, and fade that we got off the open, and then this pop and fade that we had intraday. I want to take a look at those. Let's take a look here from left to right. Very contextual open. We got a fade in volume after that higher volume first bar of the day. We got a little bit of pops here on the green bars. However, we matched it with a couple of red bars. I think if we wanted to get really nitpicky, we could sit here and say, well, you know, maybe there's a tiny amount of bullish bias, but I'm not comfortable assigning that just because we're not seeing really any consecutive bars and we're kind of matching with similar red candles. As we get later into the day here, well, actually, I want to point this out. We saw, about 3 consecutive red bars that were out of context in terms of volume, kind of starting here and then these 2 to follow on that move downside into the bottom of this move. Not quite the intraday low, but into the bottom of that fade that we got after the recovery. Now, that is a slight bearish bias. There's no way around that. That's relatively obvious. It's not overwhelming by any means, but it's there, okay? And then as we move into this move here on this pop, again, a couple of stray higher volume green bars, kind of get a match there with a little bit lower volume of a red bar on the back end of that move. But again, for me, I'm not comfortable assigning bias there. So really all we're seeing is this slight bearish bias here on that fade after the recovery there in the kind of late morning. But let's move on here and take a look at the self-fulfilling prophecy psychological levels that I'm going to need to be paying attention to come Monday. So if you guys remember in Thursday's video, we talked a lot about how SoundHound reclaimed the 50 period on the 30-minute chart, and that was a wonderful thing to see. However, we closed very close to making a retest of that. So today, Friday, heading into the weekend, this was a big day for a test. In pre-market this morning, we made a quick test of that 200 period and faded pretty much the rest of the day. We gave up the 50 period here today, partly because it was rising after yesterday's move and that after-hours push that we saw, and then the stock just faded beneath it. We actually saw a retest intraday and faded back below. So now we currently find ourselves heading into Monday. The stock is about 3.9% away from making a retest of that 50 period. Listen, we've seen more volatility than that as of late, especially on SoundHound. So it's not out of the question. Bears, any retest, you guys would just want to see kind of a repeat of this rejection here. Bulls, best case scenario come Monday is going to be a reclaim of the 50 period. The best case scenario, I suppose if we're talking best case scenarios, would be a reclaim of both of those, but that would require at least a 7% upside move, which is asking a little bit more than what is typical lately out of the volatility on SoundHound. But just so we're aware, that's really what I'm watching. Now let's move on here to the 4-hour chart and take a look. You can see here, if we zoom in, that this 200 period was very much so in play. We were bouncing around it Thursday heading into Friday, and today this fade took us downside back beneath, and we now find ourselves about 7% away from a retest of that 200 period here on the 4-hour chart. We see the 50 period, the white line, and the 200 period coming together. As those two come together, I expect them to form a slightly beefed up version of what would currently be a potential resistance. So I'm paying attention to that. Bulls, I want to see a reclaim of both of those levels as soon as we possibly can. It's going to take a little bit of volatility to get up there, but a reclaim would be ideal because as those two come together, again, it tends to beef up the strength of that level. Not necessarily by double, at least in my experience. In my experience, when two important levels come together, I usually see something like a 50% increase, at least if I'm going to make an estimation. Now, let's move on to the setup, or the story more so, with the most eyeballs. and that's going to be the daily chart. Okay, if we take a look here, you can see that today, you know, when it's all said and done, was actually a relatively small red day, especially when you start looking at things on the daily. Okay, but we look here, that 50-day is right now at about 475. Guys, the most crucial two levels that I'm watching, we're right now between a huge psychological level of 5 and a nearly as important psychological level of 550. Those 50-cent round numbers, those are big psychological levels, but when we're dealing with a stock in the $5 range, every round number is a major psychological level. Think of 5 as the equivalent of like 500 on a stock. 6 is the equivalent of like 600 on a stock. Big psychological levels, right? So Monday is kind of the battle of 5 and 550 bulls. Any downside test of 5, I don't want to give up 5. Okay? If the bulls let this thing slide into the $4 range, the bears are going to see that as a big win, and they're going to take that and run with it and try to crack downside below the 50-day moving average. Once the bears accomplish that break, the psychology of the entire stock, at least in the short term, right? Long term, the fundamentals always take over, right? But in the short term, it's all psychology. A break downside of 5 and the 50-day moving average is going to be a little bit of a hit on the psychology of the bulls, okay? And an ego boost for the bears. You don't want that if you're a bull, right? Any test of 5, we want to hold that. A break upside of 550 and a hold, that's a great thing to see. That buys us some room in between the stock and 5 with an additional psychological level in between. Bears, we just talked about it, right? You want to break downside of 5. That sets you up for a test of that 50-day moving average, but the break itself, if it's for 3 minutes, is meaningless, right? You need to break and hold. Downside break of 5 on high volume, retest of 5 on low volume, and establish that as a new resistance level by rejecting hard on high volume, heading down toward that 50-day. Bears, that's your ideal scenario come Monday. Bulls, that's what we don't want to see. Now, if we take a look here, guys, at the expected move, the next expiration we have is Friday at the close, plus or minus 67 cents per share. Okay, if we take a look out, we don't have any earnings or anything that throws off the volatility expectation day by day. So that gives us a daily expectation of about 13 cents per share. But I like to add about 50% to that to make up for like the fact that that assumes a green streak or a red streak for all 5 days. I like to add about 50% to make up for that volatility of the mix in green and red days. And that gives us a market expectation of about plus or minus 20 cents per share. So you can decide, okay, do you think it's going to be more than that or less than that? And coupled with your directional bias, that helps you position yourself much more effectively. All right, now let's take a look at the directional bias here in the chain out of the options traders today, positioning themselves heading into Monday. Really quick, first off, I want to show you guys this. The close on SoundHound today was $5.18 a share, right? Well, we got here, this is a poll I ran. I'm running these every single day, by the way. And I'm running this to get a sample size of how retail investors and traders are feeling day to day. So I ran this yesterday asking, okay, where is SoundHound going to close today, Friday, heading into the weekend? Okay, and the majority said below $5. Well, they were off by a few percent here. We got this 5 to 525, 13% guessed correctly there. So, by the way, I think this is, to me, this is more than just fun. It is for fun, mostly. But I think this is actually a really interesting way to take a poll that doesn't really exist many places on the internet day to day on a lot of stocks. But anyway, let's go back here and take a look. And by the way, you can find those in the community tab on the channel. Hope to see you vote in future ones. I'll be posting these every day on stocks that I'm covering. But if we look here, now volume is low, so take this with a grain of salt, but just under 36,000 total contracts traded, 26,000 of those were calls and 9,600 puts. So we are seeing a call side bias on the overall ratio. And again, volume is low, so take this with a grain of salt, but the short-term speculators, that 0 to 20 delta range, just under 6,000 calls and about 1,200 puts. Call side bias there as well. Listen, guys, again, SoundHound was today's wildcard winner. Be sure to vote. This is for the 6:30 Eastern Time slot every single weekday. Be sure to vote for that in the comment section down below for Monday's wildcard stock. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.